Hello and welcome to my presentation. I'd like to start out by saying thank you for choosing to come hear what I have to say today. My presentation kind of has a lengthy title. It's a bit of a mouthful, but it's called A Review of the Use of Computerized Cognitive Rehabilitation Therapy Among African Children with Cognitive Impairment Secondary to Infectious Disease. So just a little background information. I conducted this research in the fall of 2019 for the Health Science Research Methods class. When I was looking for something to write my systematic review about, I remembered my brother was actually in Africa working on a pretty cool project that would work great for research, and it was something that I wanted to look into further. So, for those of you who don't know me very well, I have an identical twin brother who is pursuing a career in video game design at Michigan State University. He works for the Games for Entertainment and Learning Lab there, and his group was actually asked by a group of Michigan State researchers if they would develop a package of games that could be used as a form of computerized cognitive rehabilitation therapy that would help young African children who have cognitive deficits secondary to living with diseases such as cerebral malaria, severe malarial anemia, and HIV. So my twin brother actually got to travel to Africa with his team and watch these children play the games that he had developed, as well as present to the researchers and fix any bugs that needed to be fixed. So you can see in figure 2, this is actually a photo that my twin brother took of a young girl playtesting one of the games that he created that is included in a brain-powered games package. So without further ado, I'll get right into it. So infectious diseases such as cerebral malaria, severe malarial anemia, and human immunodeficiency virus, or HIV, are cause for a public health crisis in sub-Saharan Africa. Just about 1 in 4 children surviving with these diseases are known to suffer neurocognitive deficits, such as impaired attention, memory, speech, and language, impaired visual spatial ability, and executive function, and they're also known to suffer mental health disorders 6 months after contracting these diseases. There are some common cognitive rehabilitation techniques that exist to treat these deficits, but there is new research that suggests computerized cognitive rehabilitation therapy, or CCRT, may offer a more effective method of treatment. So this is the type of treatment that my brother got to help create. It is a computer-based training program focused on learning through repetition, adaptive challenges, and neuroplasticity. So basically, my task was to compile all the available literature um, that evaluated this type of computerized cognitive rehabilitation therapy, as well as the literature that compared it to common cognitive rehabilitation therapy in order to reach a conclusion that would hopefully show that the games my twin brother had helped create were a better form of therapy for these African children living with cognitive deficits. So my methods, I conducted a PubMed and CINAHL database searches in September of 2019. Some of the search terms I used were cognitive impairment in African children, cognitive rehabilitation techniques in African children, cerebral malaria in African children, and cognitive impairment. Michael Boyven was the biologist researcher at the University of Michigan State that my brother traveled and worked with, who did much of this research and wrote many of the articles that I reviewed. My search was limited to African children under 18 years of age, techniques involving computerized rehabilitation, results pertaining to cognition, and experimental studies. I also used some introductory sources that I found through a review of the references used by the primary research articles. So you can see in figure 1 the systematic review protocol process. This basically shows that I had originally found 15 articles, but boiled it down to 8 articles that I would use in my systematic review just based on my inclusion and exclusion criteria. So some results. 8 of my articles were included in my review. 7 of these 8 articles studied demonstrated cognitive improvement following CCRT intervention when compared to baseline. Of these 7, 2 of the studies found improvement in memory, 2 of them found improvement in attention, 3 studies found improvement in maze learning, and one study also showed improvement in knowledge, sequential processing, and planning. Only one of the articles that I found um, resulted in diminished effect following CCRT intervention. And there was a lack of a quantitative comparison to common rehabilitation techniques to the computerized cognitive rehabilitation techniques. But one study in particular showed that African health practitioners believe CCRT is the future of cognitive rehabilitation. So what does this say about public health? It shows that common or computerized cognitive rehabilitation therapies can be an effective method of cognitive rehabilitation in African children who suffer from this cognitive impairment secondary to these infectious diseases. And as I mentioned before, African health professionals are also hopeful for the future of CCRT implementation, replacing common cognitive rehabilitation techniques. To conclude, unfortunately, I did not find a lot of research that quantitatively compared common cognitive rehabilitation techniques to the computerized rehabilitation techniques. So further research is necessary in order to establish that the computerized rehabilitation techniques should be utilized as a replacement for common rehabilitation techniques in medical practice. And finally, I'd just like to say thank you to Dr. Gerald Schaefer and the Health Science Department for their help through all of this. And once again, thank you for attending.